Kiantar Betancourt. I'm from Atenil SAA. We're located in Paraguay. We manage 300,000 hectares there in the Paraguayan Chaco, which I'll be commenting on a little bit in a moment. Thanks.
Hi, it's really nice to be here. So Kate McGavin, I'm Chief Policy and Strategy Officer at the UK Infrastructure Bank. We are 3 years old. We were established, set up in Leeds. We've got 22 billion of financial capacity to invest in economic infrastructure across the UK, and included within that is natural capital. I think we are the first country to define natural capital under the umbrella of infrastructure.
I'm Philip Dunne. I chair the Environmental Audit Committee in Parliament, which is the main scrutiny body in the House of Commons, covering the whole environmental activities and policy development of the government. We've taken a significant interest this Parliament in nature. We've done 2 inquiries into biodiversity, one domestic, one international, building on the Dasgupta review. And we have this year provided a completed report on food security, and we are in the midst of a report directly on the subject of natural capital. And the main reason why we decided to do this was to raise awareness amongst parliamentarians of what on earth natural capital is, what is the role for the UK in trying to lead its development and uptake. We've got some natural advantages in this country, and we'll talk about some of those, I'm sure, during this panel. But it's really been an awareness exercise for all of us on the committee, as well as the wider parliamentary estate.
Thanks. So, Katherine Foster, I'm a recovered climate diplomat and innovation lead for the EU Climate Kick, and I'm a commissioner with the Capitals Coalition, which includes natural capital as well as human and social capital, all of the capitals, and I think that's an important distinction to make here. I am on the board of the EIT Food, but will soon be giving that up as I'll be leading out the World Economic Forum European Food Innovation Hub through EIT Food. And the EIT Food, for those of you that are not aware, is the European Institute of Technology. It is the world's largest food innovation organization, doing startup, research, education, corporate collaboration to increase our capacities to innovate around risk and resilience, net zero, and healthier lifestyles.
Brilliant, thank you so much. Well, I'm still I'm not as au fait on natural capital as other areas. So, Philip, what is natural capital? You're looking at this.
Well, natural capital has been around as long as the planet's been around, and it's a way of valuing nature. The ONS started doing this, I think, the first time 10 years ago tomorrow. They published their first assessment of what is the value of ecosystems in the UK. Since then, there has been an acceleration of interest in trying to get a handle on what this amounts to. So in the Dasgupta review, he estimated in 2021 that the planet is consuming about 1.6 times its natural resources through consumption. And that's clearly totally unsustainable. So he has triggered an acceleration of interest in how do we place a value on natural capital which allows actors, corporates, individuals to start to assess their environmental impact on nature, and how do we, by placing a value on it, can we thereby reduce it? Because through regulation introduced by governments, through reporting standards, so the Task Force on Nature of Financial Disclosure is an absolutely key element in persuading corporate behaviour to take into account their impact on nature. And here in the UK, we've introduced a progressive increase in standards, which are very important to be able to. If you don't have data to assess what nature is, you can't measure it, you can't therefore regulate it. And through the British Standards Institute, who are progressively introducing standards. I think they've got 22 different initiatives. They've launched their first one earlier this year. And through the sustainability frameworks that are coming in, again, right now, a lot of this is real time. We are beginning to evolve the kind of regulatory environment and infrastructure which allows companies, individuals to be able to assess what they've got and valorize it and make a market out of it.
Okay, thank you very much. And Kate, can I ask you, so what about from the sort of the banking sector? What do you see are the opportunities around natural capital and how banking can help?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me talk a little bit about who we are and how we operate within the banking sector. So as I say, we are the government's infrastructure investment bank, and we look to invest across the capital stack, really, in infrastructure, including in natural capital. The way we operate is that we will only invest where we're needed, and we are looking to crowd in other actors to help establish and cornerstone markets and transactions. We have 22 billion to invest. 10 of that is guarantees, sovereign-backed guarantees from the government. 4 billion is ring-fenced to lend to local authorities, and we can lend, for example, to flood attenuation schemes or other areas where local authorities are trying to get into this sector. And then the remaining 8 billion is for debt and equity transactions. All of our transactions are bespoke, and as I say, in all of them we are looking to help solve problems. So we sit at that nexus between policy, and we spend a lot of time with policy teams across government, so including in the NG department or in DEFRA in the Environment Department, and with the market. And we think about ourselves as helping to sort of translate between those disciplines, and by getting close to policy, we can really understand policy risk and sometimes then take a bit more risk in the market. So in relation to natural capital, we've already invested or committed 62 million from within and started to develop our portfolio. That's across 2 transactions. The first is a 12 million bridging loan that we made to a company called Highlands Rewilding up in Scotland to allow them to buy a tract of land and develop their lab, which is doing some of the stuff that Philip mentioned in terms of developing the data that will underpin these markets. And then we've committed up to 52 million into Green Sphere Capital's Gaia Sciences Innovation Fund, which similarly is looking to invest across an aggregated portfolio of startups and research initiatives, because we feel that at the moment it's such a nascent market. There aren't big transactions out there that will meet what is normally our minimum ticket size of around 25 million. So instead we're looking to help seed and develop the base of the market, really make sure that the establishment of that data and metrics is on a firm footing, which will then help develop and accelerate market.
Brilliant, thank you. Thank you. And I forgot to mention at the beginning, we're using Slido, and if you want to write any questions or for the panel, please do. There'll be plenty of time for questions at the end. So, do we have any good examples of natural capital projects, natural capital sort of projects that are happening? Kiantar, you're from the Global South and from Paraguay, I believe. Do you have any examples?
Yeah, sure. Just to give a little bit of context about Paraguay for those in the audience that maybe haven't heard about it too much. Paraguay is in the heart of South America. In terms of land area, it's about double the size of Great Britain. And in that land, there's about 4 different very unique biospheres. One being the North Atlantic rainforest. There's the Pantanal, which is one of the largest wetlands on Earth. There's the Cerrado, and then there's the Chaco. So the Chaco is the second largest forested region in South America after the Amazon. And it is being deforested at about a rate of 35,000 hectares per month. So about a third of the size of London per month. And I think there are a lot of wonderful projects going on there. There's a lot of habitat restoration. Just talking about the Chaco for a moment, there's a lot of endemic species there. There's incredible, my favorite being the maned wolf, which is kind of a cross between a fox and a deer and kind of a wolf. And then they have the giant anteater, and they have the giant armadillo, and the tapir, which is kind of like a little mini elephant. And our group, we've been very closely following the natural capital arguments, because it's a way of valuing the nature services that property provides, because a lot of the reason why deforestation happens is because of economic opportunity. A lot of the agri-businesses there, which is the backbone of the Paraguayan economy, look to expand, and that often includes deforesting for cattle ranching or for agricultural purposes. But Paraguay is a country where they're they're landlocked. So to be able to bring their products out of the country, they need to use the river, and also 99% of its electricity, actually very fortunately, comes from hydroelectricity. So it has huge renewable electricity source, which of course we know is thanks to the rivers and the deforestation there. So the argument there in terms of our project, we have a RED project, we have a habitat restoration project where we have the first, I'd say, large-scale native tree nursery, where we're looking to restore different parts of degraded lands within our own property and in the surrounding properties around us. And that's been very encouraging to see, even the support from the national government there and the National Forestry Institute and the National MADES. But I think just to get to, there's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of positive work, but a lot of work to do also in educating the public that the forests are what actually create the water that the country needs also to survive. So as much as jobs are important, because that's an argument that sometimes the counter argument to that is, well, we need progress, we need to create more jobs, we need economic growth, and the natural capital markets, the carbon market, are tools that are being created that need to be done in a proper way, but there are tools that are being created that can add value to the trees, for example, right? So, now I would say, and I'll leave just with this comment, at about a $15 to $20 carbon credit price, it becomes a little bit, you will lose money doing cattle over the long run compared to maybe maintaining your forest. And those are very encouraging signs that we hope will long continue.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And Philip, in your work, have you seen some examples of projects in the UK?
So I think we need to distinguish between the voluntary and the mandated markets. So the UK is the first country in the world to introduce the biodiversity net gain requirement on planning development. That has come into effect this year. So every development, whether it's which requires planning consent, whether it's an extension at the back of your house or it's a new town of 10,000 houses, the developers are going to have to ensure that they leave 110% more biodiversity after they've completed the development than the land that was used had before. So that's creating a legal requirement, a mandated system, which will, in most cases, will be satisfied by the developers adding an area within their development which improves biodiversity. But in many cases, particularly for the larger developments, it will require them to go out and buy natural capital credits from land managers, from farmers primarily. And that system is so new that the trades are beginning to happen, but there's been very, very few thus far. The estimate that our committee has heard in evidence is that there'll be a requirement for some 2,000 to 3,000 hectares in the UK. Now, in the context of what we've just heard about Paraguay, that's obviously an insignificant amount from a global point of view, but that's going to be every year that we have additional development. So it will accumulate, and it will create it'll facilitate a market to develop, because it will allow both for standards to be set, measurements to be taken over time, because this has to last for 30 years. So that's a major issue on enforcement. How do we measure something over a period of time? What happens if the biodiversity over that time degrades? All these things have to be considered and codified, and it will allow for a market to develop. And the pricing of the market that exists right now is incredibly uncertain, because nobody really knows how this market is going to develop on the mandated side. There are also, we have the Woodland Carbon Code, we have the Peatland Carbon Code. So they've been around for a few years. So we've started in the UK to develop these the Woodland ones. They're both voluntary schemes, but the voluntary market, which we were hearing about in Paraguay, is also developing at pace. One of the challenges for the UK is, because the land mass is so small, as we've just heard, it's hard to accumulate significant assets for financial investors to invest in, because the projects are relatively small in the scheme of the investment management world. But there are now in London, managed out of London, pools of capital. Kate's just mentioned one that she's invested in. There's another that gave evidence to our committee, which is managing a fund of $250 million. They've made 8 investments. I think only one are in the UK, which is into a farm business where they've been assessing the soil carbon locked up in soil for the last 10 years, but most of them are things like 1 million acres of 1 million hectares of mangrove swamp off the coast of Africa, 3 million hectares of outback in Australia, which is being managed in a way that this company's been able to invest in to improve biodiversity. So there are examples out there. There are examples of the UK doing things, but it's very early days.
Okay, thank you very much. So Katherine, following on from that, how can investors do more? What are the sort of their challenges and opportunities here?
Actually, I'd like to address another end to this, if that's all right, because I think what we've talked about is very, top-down. We have policies, we have large-scale investments, and I think the other side of this is with the Capitals Coalition, there are growing set of tools and frameworks that are enabling organizations to address natural capital and all of the capitals, including the human and social capital that is so intrinsic to these projects, whatever their scale. And these can be applied to products as well as projects as well as organizations. So there's a bottom-up approach that can be integrated, and the tools are there and accepted and growing. It is a dynamic framework and set of tools, and it's also not in competition with, it's actually integrating into available frameworks and tools. I started on this journey over a decade ago using digital tools to understand how we can take that intrinsic value of nature and human and social capital that we're seeing in the SDG frameworks, we're seeing in that type of reporting and investment approach in ESGs, as well as the voluntary carbon markets and now the growing biodiversity markets. And what's interesting is with the Capitals Coalition, they have integrated IUCN data and guidelines. So it's a very sort of systemic approach that can be applied top-down as well as bottom-up.
Oh, right, brilliant. Yes, no, I can see that. How can innovations in digital technology and help to unlock sort of some of the finance? So, Kate.
I think Katherine's really well placed for that one. I think this is we're probably less focused on the digital tech side than she is.
Okay.
I think what we're seeing is sort of 3 silos in digital innovation. We're seeing green fintech, sort of investment tools, green financing for investments. And those are for larger scale projects, but also for investment in green technology. And then we have a lot of the digital innovation that we're seeing out on the floor today that has been developing for over a decade. And that is where we're using the innovation and underpinning that is data. And the data is there to unlock, the monitoring, reporting, and valuation is unlocking data for CO2, for SDGs. And it's that integrative data that then can be applied also to natural capitals for valuation at different types of investments, as well as different types of financing mechanisms.
Okay, thank you, Philip.
Could I just jump in on that? So in order to assess the whole of the UK from its biodiversity net gain potential, DEFRA has been working to establish standards using satellite optical technology to identify imagery down to, I think it's about 1 meter squared, it might be slightly larger than that, to say that if a satellite is able to record what something a meter square looks like, it can it can make assumptions about what biodiversity is contained within that, whether it's a different type of tree species, different type of grassland, whatever it happens to be. They flew. I got a notice from DEFRA. I farm on the Herefordshire-Shropshire borders for full discovery. I had a query from the RPA saying that they'd flown over and they'd seen this patch of bareness in an area which they thought was a field. Turns out it was a patch of hard standing, which on the day they flew over, it was reflecting back white imagery and they couldn't tell what it was. And they were about to fine me for claiming on something which I'd never claimed on. So these things are not infallible. It will take quite a long time to build up the data. Quite a long time. It will take some time. Data management now is very, very efficient, and it'll take much less time than it used to. But there are technologies being used to address your question, which will facilitate a standardization and reporting requirements, which are so essential for this market to develop.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much. Yes.
Just to add on to that, because I think we hear a lot about the big tech, the satellite imagery. I started in geographic information systems when we were still digitizing things by hand, uploading the maps and whatnot. And we also have a lot of localized projects where that type of data may not necessarily be accessible, but you can layer it up, which is the really important part. And we can use standard data. So we're using SMS and non-smartphones technology in real time, but also in lag time, to enable different types of metrics to be uploaded and layered up for these different tools.
Fascinating. So, can I go on to the challenges? Kiantar, I'd like to ask you, what are some of the challenges you see from your perspective around the natural capital markets?
Yeah, I mean, just again, I'm just speaking from my experience. So in Paraguay, about 80% of the land is owned in private hands. So it's very important the actions of the private market in trying to manage these natural assets in a more sustainable way. But I think some of the tools that we're seeing are actually very, very useful from a technological standpoint, where you can monitor the forest, you can track illegal deforestation. You can, actually, the National Forestry Institute just rolled out a national reforestation plan that's actually very encouraging, showing critical areas in the country that need reforestation to prevent erosion into the rivers. The binational dam Itaipu, which is a binational project with Brazil. They have one of the largest private forestry reserves of the North Atlantic of the Atlantic rainforest there, and they've been doing reforestation projects. So I think as more, and especially countries like Great Britain, can really take the lead in this, kind of showing an example on how to manage the resources, of course, because of the budgets, right? Because budgets sometimes are also very limited in the global south for these types of activities, and then also finding a way for even the capital from these markets to be able to go and invest into those markets, whether it be in purchasing land that's on the literal chopping block. There's 2 million hectares of permits for deforestation that have been issued already by the Paraguayan government. So while they are making efforts on one side to try to create other opportunities in the reforestation area, or their own national efforts to try to reforest certain areas, but again, there's a lot of cooperation that's needed from the private market as well, and to find those economic opportunities. And as those opportunities increase, and especially from the developed worlds where all the capital is basically, and then we can find ways that can actually have the intended impact in the global south. I think that those are some of the challenges that we're going through, but it's something that I look at with a lot of hope.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and Kate, how about from your perspective? What are some of the challenges that you're seeing?
Yeah, I think we've talked about a couple of them. We've talked quite extensively about the problem at the kind of, I guess, baseline level around data and metrics, and there's some really good progress, I think, that's being made on that front. We've talked a little bit about scale. So as Kiantar is saying, and as others have said, the scale of project in the UK is much smaller than other parts of the world. But I think that here in the UK we have a real opportunity to be a leader in some of the thinking about how you develop these markets. There's two others, I guess, that I would focus in on. One is revenue streams. So in order to make a market investable, it's one thing to invest in the asset itself, but in order to create the market itself, you are going to need to ensure that those environmental services are able to create revenue streams and attract investors. There is work going on there. I think that DEFRA currently have been consulting on how you might be able to stack some of the credits and some of the revenue generating mechanisms, and I think that's really interesting. And then finally, I guess all of this kind of adds up into investor confidence. So investors are really interested in this area, but are understandably nervous about the quality of the asset that they might be coming in to invest in, and it's very hard then to price and manage the risk. So I think we need to be kind of moving all of those challenges forward in order to be able to create and mature this market. I think there's just one other thing that I would add, which is about engagement with local communities. So I think it's really important that as we're talking about changes to land use, that local communities are engaged. And certainly when we have been thinking about transactions on our side, we've been very careful to make sure that those we are investing in have really good community buy-in and support.
Oh, fantastic. It's very important to bring social justice to the front. So what are some of the opportunities or ways to overcome some open question? Some of the risks you talked about that are there, and is there a need for a regulatory environment or something?
Well,
Yeah.
if I may, I would say, in our case, the regulatory environment is almost non-existent in Paraguay. So yes, the government has an extremely important role to play in enforcing the laws. That is a problem in the global south, actually, enforcing some of the laws. A permit to deforest may allow you to cut 70%, but many landowners cut all of the trees, and the government should intervene there and should enforce that and penalize those bad actors, so that people will obviously manage their property in a more sustainable way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So as George Eustace earlier was talking about some of the sort of Brexit opportunities, we have an opportunity in the UK now to get this right, to set the framework which allows a new and completely new market to develop. But it has to be, investors have to have confidence that it's a credible market, that it's being regulated in varying degrees. Without that, the opportunity for greenwashing and people to lose a lot of money by not understanding how pricing is going to work is very high. We've got farmers at the moment under significant pressure as the traditional cap subsidy declines. Natural capital provides potentially a much more significant revenue stream over a period of years, and the challenge for the land managers at the moment, in the absence of the land use framework, which is coming in later this year, and the absence of understanding, with an opaque market which isn't clear, people don't really know what to do. And many of the advisory organisations are saying, just don't jump into something today, because you may find you're making a 30-year commitment and you don't really understand what the obligations are going to be on you over that, or you and your heirs over that 30 years. It has all sorts of challenges between landlords and tenants. Tenancies are normally much less than 30 years. They're less and less, often annual at the moment. So how does a tenant get involved in all this? There's a lot of complexity in making this work, which is why I think the government has been right to do a sort of step-by-step, incremental, create more standards, providing confidence all the while that they have credibility, because if they introduce a set of standards that nobody believes in, it will undermine the market fatally.
Yes. Ooh. And so, Katherine, how are investors dealing with this complexity, the need to look long term, and have they come up with solutions of how to solve it?
I think, I'm not the investor expert. I think Kate is probably more aligned with that type of thinking, but I've been working on green digital finance. I was leading out the Green Digital Finance Alliance for a few years, and that is where we're seeing sort of innovative approaches to investing. And there we can see, again, that cross-fertilization of different policy drivers. And I think that's one thing I'd like to highlight here. You were speaking about regenerative agriculture, and I think the risk is abated slightly when we're doing that cross-pollination. So by driving regenerative agriculture through sort of a capital's lens, it's sort of bolstering both approaches. So I would say that is also part of the ecosystem and systemic driver behind this, and the intergenerational approach. I mean, we learned our key lessons with carbon markets, for example. They started before the digital innovation was available to us, and we faced numerous challenges. So we've learned lessons about the innovation behind that, and for investors, that part of de-risking the space is going to be absolutely essential. So the more we can integrate the policy drivers as well as the actual concrete projects and initiatives, and also the collaborations around that by doing sort of a systems approach involving the cross stakeholders, that really de-risks the space for investors.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any?
Could I just add one other thing, which I think is important? The UK, as a result of the financial market headquartered in the City of London, is in a very unusual place to help develop this. We've got a benign government. Obviously, that we're going to have an election soon, so things may change. But there is, broadly speaking, a political consensus that this is an opportunity that we need to capture. We have the City of London, which is one of the most innovative financial markets in the world. They have been at the centre of carbon credit trading for the last 10 years or so. That is accelerating apace. There's a great deal of interest amongst city investors and market makers in trying to make sure that the natural capital market evolves, learning the lessons from the carbon market. It took 35 years for the carbon market really to develop to where it is today. And I think we've got a real opportunity, a real market advantage to lead the way, to show, as our friend from Paraguay was saying, we can, several other countries look to the UK for setting standards, not just in finance, but in many other areas of regulated life. So I think this is an opportunity that we need to grasp. And I would like to go away from this event and from the work that our committee does when we publish our report in coming couple of months with a gold standard that we're saying the UK is open for business for natural capital. This is the place you need to come to understand the innovation that's going on around the world, and let's bring it on.
Brilliant, thank you. So I've got some questions from the audience. So one of the criticisms of these markets is that it creates a divide between nature and food. So is there a missed opportunity with these markets that could help fund the transition to regenerative and agroecological production systems?
This is an area that I really want to undertake. Given that I started today, it'll take a little while to really answer this thoroughly. But I think that there is a misconception that natural capital is solely about the economic valuation of capital. But when we take a capitals approach, including the human and social capital, these are the underpinning, the drivers behind enabling the systemic approaches like regenerative agriculture to take place. Because regenerative agriculture isn't about point innovation. It is about systems innovation, much similar to natural capital projects and initiatives. So to me, there is a clear synergy there that is something that we need to explore.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, if I may briefly. Yeah, actually Paraguay, for example, is a leader in non-tillage soy, and that was done, so that's where they use cover crops, and it was used, I think, in a large sense, that traps much more carbon in the soils. And that's something that, as we see the natural capital market to encourage more of that behavior, right? Because if there is economic opportunity there to maintaining or growing those types of systems, that I think that's something that will continue to be widely adopted because it's already something a common practice in the country, and it's just a matter of encouraging that so that it continues.
Absolutely, and it does add on to the biodiversity because we're using biodiversity rather than chemicals, and also about the social and community innovation and ecosystem. It applies regenerative agriculture and capitals approaches actually looks to fueling the economic local economy as well.
Okay, thank you. So, an interesting question. Should the UK or other countries adopt protectionist measures to ensure that their farmers and growers can domestically produce all the necessary fresh fruits and vegetables?
That's probably best answered by me. So we're changing the system for the first time in 40-something years of agricultural support, and it's moving towards a system where it is designed to be rewarding nature-friendly types of farming, touched on regenerative agriculture, but there are other elements. At the same time as technology is changing the way we produce food at a very rapid pace. So just to give you one example, as of today, I believe most of the major supermarket groups import most of their tomatoes. There is a plant being built right now east of London, which was a former quarry, became a landfill site, becoming an energy generator. The waste heat from that plant, which is a £650 million investment, is going into the largest glass house being built in the UK, which will supply all of one of the main supermarkets' tomato requirements across the country. That will cut the imports of tomatoes by that supermarket chain to zero. And that is nothing to do with with the way in which we farm the land, apart from the small amount of acres that will go under the glasshouse. So I think we're going to see a transformation. George Eustace was talking about vertical farming. We are going to see farming of things that we didn't think we would be farming. Insects, for example, replacing the requirement to import animal feed from Brazil. We import 3.5 million tons of soya protein to feed livestock in this country. There will be ways that we can replace that protein source domestically produced without using huge amounts of acres of land to do it. At the moment, I forget the number, it's about 20%, but maybe more of our arable land goes to produce the feed for our chickens and pigs. So many of these things are going to change as a result of technological innovation, and that's why we shouldn't be locked into a very old-fashioned way of supporting farmers through their ownership of land. We should be supporting farmers to value the nature that they're the stewards of, and that's where natural capital has such a huge role to play in the future, I think.
Yes, certainly, and we're seeing more of that. There was an interesting report that came out yesterday around how industrial livestock is producing more water pollution and air pollution than the 10 largest cities in the UK combined. So we're seeing a bit of a disconnect between that, which plays to your animal feed point. A question that's come up in a couple of different ways is, so one of the criticisms of BNG is it creates a divide between nature and food. So should we be valuing nature? And is there a missed opportunity that could help funds to for the transition to regen to begin? That's a two-part question there.
Can I have another go?
Yeah.
I mean, I think this is a very old-fashioned way of looking at it. We are today, on my farm, and most farms in the UK, producing 4 times the yield from our arable crops as we did when my father was growing only 50 years ago. It's astonishing the extent to which technology and advance in plant breeding techniques has changed the productivity of our land. You know, the population of the world is going to peak at the end, by the end of this century, and we've been very successful as a human species in feeding a rapidly growing population over this time. We're going to start seeing populations decline at the same time as we're increasing the productivity of our food sources enormously. So we shouldn't just think that it's a binary decision. If you take land out of food production, you're going to reduce the amount of food that's produced. It doesn't work like that.
Okay. Here's one I think maybe for Kate. It's these new markets require new skills that traditional investors, they don't have the knowledge, and they don't have the skills or the ability to look far enough into the future. So how can we reduce the barriers to new entrants, and how can we skill them up?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think that the whole market is demanding a different set of skills, and certainly things like there is a need for more ecologists and more operating in that kind of skill area in order for them to be able to inform some of the investment decisions that banks make. I mean, I think that what some of this discussion is showing is that those old divisions between different sectors and different ways in which you might think about individual markets are breaking down, and investors are having to think more flexibly, more creatively about how they might value risk, how they and kind of where their investment might then get placed. But I think the financial sector are up for the challenge. This is an area that's hugely exciting, and I think as financial institutions are looking to decarbonise their book, they are absolutely looking at where there might be opportunities here and where they might be able to understand this market better.
Okay, thank you. And then a final question from the audience is, a big concern around this is that things like biodiversity, net gain and other metrics, they focus on quantity of biodiversity, not quality. How can this be addressed?
I think this is reflecting the very early nascent stages of this asset class, if I can call it that. As I was saying earlier, in order to develop a means of measuring biodiversity, rather than have men or women in white coats going out and counting insects in a square metre or or fungi in the soil, which is very impossible to do at scale across the system. We're taking a proxy, which is a satellite image of and identifying the different types of land cover and making that a proxy for the biodiversity that lives within that type of land cover. That's the least sophisticated, but the quickest way to develop a metric. As time goes by, the metrics will become vastly more complex, more sophisticated, and we will get much better understanding of biodiversity. I'll give you one other example, if I may. I went to Wakehurst Place, which is run by Kew Gardens as part of our committee work, and we met there a PhD student who had been commissioned by DEFRA to work out how much carbon was locked up in different types of trees. They've got wonderful arboretum there. And there are a large number of different ways of calculating carbon in a tree. And this chap had assessed, using the 10 most frequently used models, how much carbon was in a particular tree. And all the current methodologies relied around a tape measure. So you measure the circumference of the tree, you measure the height of the tree, and you do a mathematical calculation. And as it happens, the tree that he'd been looking at fell over during the course of his one-year project. So they were able to take the tree, chop it up, weigh it, and have an actual measurement of how much mass was in the tree. It's a very difficult thing to do while the tree is still living, but they were able to do this, and they came up with the magical conclusion that the best of the 10, the closest of the 10 different measurement methods was 30% below, underestimating the amount of carbon locked up in that tree. Now, if that is the way in which the world has been measuring the amount of carbon locked up in our trees, bingo, we suddenly actually realised that there's 30% more around the planet, roughly. So there's going to be lots of ups and downs in this, but I think that is a very good illustration of the challenge that we've got and how we will get more sophisticated over time.
Right, fantastic.
If I might jump in, as part of the Value Commissioner for the Capitals Coalition, I think what we are trying to do is integrate numerous metrics and data inputs and measurement frameworks in order to have a more robust and adaptable approach. And I think that is really key here. It has to be dynamic. It has to be about ecosystem health, and the ecosystem isn't just about carbon. It isn't just about biodiversity. It isn't just about the nature or the agriculture. It's also about the community and the stakeholders across any ecosystem or value chain. And I think that's really essential. And I think the other part of this dialogue, we talked about whether food could be produced nationally, basically. And I think that also goes down to the culture of innovation and the culture of food. Because what we're seeing also is this notion, people are becoming more educated, consumers are becoming more educated about the need for resilience in our food system, and maybe we can stop thinking about needing strawberries in February. At the same time, we can produce some of them locally with integrated different technologies. This is also applied in terms of the way we're measuring. I think there is a risk, I say this often, there's a risk by focusing solely on one level of measurement, that there's, I call it the 5 Gs. We have geographic, gender, generational, as well as groups of stakeholders that need to be a part of that systemic approach to evaluating the health of the ecosystem in our food systems.
Brilliant, thank you. So we are running out of time, so I'm going to ask each of the panellists to quickly say sort of what action or engagement do you believe could have meaningful effect beyond this event? Start with you, Kiantar.
Yeah, I would say as a project producer, right, we work in the voluntary carbon market, and I think clarity is very helpful for us, right? I mean, we have seen a lot of the criticisms, and a lot of those criticisms were absolutely appropriate, but clarity in terms of what we should do, right? Like from the developed capital markets, like what we need to do to be attractive or to be transparent, because we will do those efforts. We've been following. Vera, for example, has a new red standard that came out, and we switched our project over to that because we want to follow the integrity that aligns with the Integrity Council. So yeah, I would say that type of clarity coming from from the sources of capital around the world, because that's what can make a big difference, is something that's very helpful for us.
Brilliant. Thank you. Kate?
Yeah, I'll take your clarity. I'll give it another C, which is kind of collaboration. I think what this discussion has shown is that it is very interdisciplinary, very multifaceted. So, that kind of collaborative conversation between different disciplines, I think the ability to test and learn. So, for us, small amounts of investment, working out how that works its way through the system, learning from it and being able to scale off the back of it is one of the ways in which we will get to that kind of sophisticated endpoint that Philip was talking about.
I'll give you another C. Contact my committee. We've got another month or so before we finish our report. So there's anybody in the audience who've got some insights which would help inform our report into what is natural capital, how do we make it work, please get in touch with me. I'm an MP, I'm quite easy to find, and we'll try and take your comments into account.
Brilliant. And finally,
I was going to say collaboration, so I'll add another C, and let's call it cross-systemic. Because I think we have a lot of international, national policies and guidelines and projects, but it really does come down to the local context, right down to the actual individual farms and the actual individual trees that we're talking about.
brilliant. What a nice way to finish, individual farms and trees. So could you thank me and this wonderful panel for such an engaging discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you.